Now, when I was imagining all this, before I'd started to build anything, in my mind, the lever had the same mass as one of the balls. And in that scenario, the collision point needs to be the square root of 1/3 of the distance along the lever from the pivot. But in reality, the lever is heavier than one of the balls. And my first thought was, well, that's easy because I know about levers and mechanical advantage. So if the lever is twice the mass of the ball, then, well, it's just as if I doubled the mass on the end of a lever. And so in the same way, I need to move the collision point double the distance from that magic square root of 1/3 distance. And if the lever is triple the mass, then we triple the distance, and so on. I've been experimenting with a few different levers. The mass ratio of this particular one is something I didn't write down, but this footage is showing you what happens when you move out by that amount. And as you can see, after the collision, the ball continues to move forwards slightly. It hasn't stopped dead. So we're too far away from the pivot. And if you remember earlier how I had to place the half mass at a distance of √2 away from the pivot for the rocket to have the same experience, well, we need to take the root of the mass ratio here too. And when we do that, this is the position of the collision. And look, the ball stops dead, which is great. Weirdly though, this lever just doesn't work very well when you bring all the balls in. This is a shorter lever that has a more traditional swivel pivot, whereas this lever works much better. Like, the back and forth bouncing doesn't last particularly long, but what's important is about one ball comes away from the Newton's cradle after each go-around, whereas before 2 or 3 balls were coming out and it was all failing in that way. You might notice that the lever is being held in place in a weird way. I'm using this fishing wire here to hold it against the pivot point, and then this fishing wire is adjustable, and that's kind of what I use to hold it level. It works pretty well. The issue is it introduces another force. Like when the ball collides with the top of the lever, that's okay. But when the ball collides with the bottom of the lever, well, the elasticity in the fishing wire is an additional force that the ball is going to encounter. My suspicion is that it's negligible, and this design has other benefits. And it works better than the other lever with the more traditional swivel pivot. And I tried different lengths of both as well. What's really weird, though, is that for this lever, the optimum position of the collision is actually nowhere near the theoretical optimum position, and it's nowhere near the fallacious theoretical optimum position either. So at this point, I just maybe we need to be thinking about like materials. You know, what's the elasticity of the lever? Is it acting like a spring, and so we kind of need to worry about some of the energy coming back? I definitely think there could be some design improvements. Maybe if I had a CNC machine, I could create a more interesting pivot that's also like a hook for the lever to hang off, well, something like that. But anyway, it's not bad. You get one ball popping out each time, but it dampens very quickly. I am aware that Action Lab released a video about the Newton's cradle while I was making this one. In it, he shows a really clever way of analysing the behaviour of a Newton's cradle in terms of shock waves. What's really interesting is you can analyse it as shock waves in the way that James does, or you can analyse it as if you have these perfectly incompressible balls that collide perfectly elastically and that have tiny gaps between them. Either way, you get exactly the same behaviour. I expect that the equivalence between these two different models hints at something deeper, but I can't think what that would be. But if we did want to think about my setup in terms of shock waves, well, what would that mean for the lever? Actually, it becomes about impedance matching. I made a whole video about that. I'll link to it in the description. I'll link to James's video as well over on Action Lab. It's definitely worth your time. But anyway, when you think about waves travelling through a system, if part of the system impedes the progress of the wave more or less than the rest of the system, then some of the wave energy gets reflected at that part. And by tuning the mass of the lever and the collision point, what we're really doing is matching the impedance of the lever to the impedance of the balls so that we don't get reflection. So whether you think about it in terms of perfectly rigid, perfectly elastic collisions, or whether you think about it in terms of traveling shock waves, the process of optimizing the lever collisions ends up at the same result.